Hey folks, welcome back to another video. Before we start and create a step sequencer inside Bitwig Studio, I want to give out some rough ideas about how to approach learning the grid. In my opinion, you don't learn how to use the grid by learning what each individual module does. And you also don't learn how to drive a car by learning what each individual car part does. So it's not how it works. You learn how to drive a car by sitting in the car, having a rough idea how everything works, and then you experiment and start to drive, and then you build experience over time. You make some failures here and there maybe, and then you learn from that. And yeah, that's how it works. It's also how you learn to program or how to learn a new programming language. You doesn't learn the language when you just read or know what each feature does. You need to get to certain points while programming to get some ideas why you need certain features, or you maybe had a problem before and then you see why this feature is helpful. But you need to have this experience before you discover why you need something. So it's the same also with the grid. If you explain to you what each individual module does, you don't know how to use the grid. You can't use it. It's just impossible. You start with a handful of small modules you know, and then you build from that. And you add maybe every day a new module to it, and you learn what you can do with this module, with your small set of knowledge you already own. And then you progress from that, and you build up new experiences, and you remember certain combinations that work well. Because a lot of modules are pretty great in a certain context they are not really made for. And that's not what a manual gives you as information, or it's also not something that most tutorials give you. You learn how to use the grid exactly like I said. You need to make a patch every day with your small little knowledge you already have, and then you build up from that every day. And that's also a fun way of learning, because you always have kind of success because you already know certain patchings that work. And then you create something from that and you learn something new, and then you see, oh well, this is actually great in this kind of context. And then you see these contexts in all kinds of places and you try to combine them, and then you have, create a much bigger knowledge base over time. And this is how you learn it. So in my opinion, take your small little knowledge, go into the grid and try to create something, and maybe take one or two new modules you never used before and try to use them. So let's build some step sequencers with the node grid. And we need, of course, a node grid. And we need a polysynth just to make sure we are also outputting some nodes. So just as a test device. Nothing fancy. And we don't, inside the node grid, we don't need actually the node inputs. So we can remove that. And as a step sequencer, I really love to use the step mod of Bitwig Studio, because it has a nice interface you can access from the device itself, and you can randomize here each step, and it's handy to use. You can also increase or decrease the steps here. You can change speed settings and so on. So it's a nice little interface we can already use. So how do we create actually step sequences for pitches and gates? In my opinion, interesting approach is to use one step mod here for gates and velocity, and a different step mod for the pitch informations. And we also utilize here each step value as a velocity setting. And you can turn this around and approach this differently if you want to. You can maybe use here each step value for a pitch signal and then use velocities in a separate step mod. Or you do it like I do here, but by using a bar for velocity. So I'm using gates and velocity, and we use value knobs inside the grid to actually receive these values. So maybe this one here is the velocity, and this one is gates. And we also need pitches. So for velocity, it's simple. We just modulate here this knob all the way through. So if a bar is all the way at the bottom, we have velocity 0, and all the way up is velocity 127. So we can straight up connect this output here to the velocity output of the node grid. Super simple. For the gates, it's not so simple, because first, when we modulate this here all the way through, we know, or I told you in some of my recent videos, that you need at least the value of 0.5 or something above to be recognized as a gate signal inside the grid. And if we connect these two here, we have no gate triggering at all below 0.5 here. Only when you reach this line. So what we want to do is we actually want to have a trigger already when we just move here slightly above 0 line. And then everything else is basically velocity. And if you have this at 0, then we have no trigger at all. So what we're going to do is we offset here the gate value to 0. Or actually 49.9 maybe. So we already at the gates of getting a gate. So now when we move up here, we have already gates just by slightly having a value above 0, right? So that's the solution for that, in my opinion. The second problem now is, maybe pull this down a bit. The second problem is that when we have multiple steps here, this kind of works because we have in between some empty steps. But when you draw in here all steps, we have one single continuously playing node. And that's not what we want. We want to have single triggers here for each step. And my solution to that is we just utilize the velocity settings. So you can see here each step has a slightly different value, and we can sniff that, or we can recognize that inside the grid by just comparing each step to the next step and looking if the velocity value changed. And when the velocity value changed, we probably switch to another step. So make a cut into the gate and have a node off. And I do this here by using a delay, of course, and we compare basically the current value of the velocity to the value of 0.02 milliseconds earlier. So at some point there is a change here between the velocity settings, and we want to recognize this as a gate. So bring this in, then we need a comparison here. I don't know what the name is. It's probably uneven here. Yes, okay. This and this. So every time we have now here a difference between the velocity settings, we get a gate signal, as you can see here. Maybe use an oscilloscope for that. So we have now here each step. And sometimes when the steps have exactly the same value, like here 41, then this one is glued together. It's one step. It's kind of an hold, or I don't know how it's called on a step sequencer. Rest, or yeah, that you basically glue multiple steps together. So we can also utilize this here as a hold feature. So now that we have this, we just take here a multiply. A multiply basically doesn't transmit anything. So we use it here for the gates. So basically when we play here gates, nothing happens because this signal doesn't pass through. So we have to input here a constant of 1 to actually pass the signal. And if the signal is at 0, you can see nothing passes. So it's also nice that we get here a gate signal, and the gate signal is exactly 1. a 1 or 0. So it's exactly what we need. And we don't want to actually connect this here, because now we only get the gate on or pass through by when something changes, which is pretty short. In fact, we want to have a not module, which basically inverts the signal here. So now we pass the signal all the time, but only when something changes in the velocity settings, we don't. So we cut off basically on each step. As you can hear here, we have a nice gate trigger all the time. But only when you have here the same the same values, then you have a hold or continuously holding node. So now we can also have the velocity here passing out, so we can use the velocity setting here on the synthesizer, make use of it. Maybe I put this delay off. So now we can go on to the pitch signals here. And this one is a bit, yeah, it's a bit strange because I don't use here a value slider. Let's see here, we have the pitches and we switch this to bipolar mode because we want to have a root node, which is 0. And then we just want to transpose away from 0 in pitches down and up, right? So we could use here maybe a pitch in, or not a pitch in, a pitch module. So we can define a root node. In this case here, it's C3. And then we use a transpose and modulate that with the pitch module and then go out. Something like this. And then you probably also want to use a sample and hold here to hold the current pitch for the current gate, because sometimes you want to have the pitch step sequencer playing at a different speed than the gate's step sequencer. And when you have different speeds, then you probably change the pitch while you have a gate active, and then you create some kind of bends between nodes. But I can show you this in a minute. So maybe just modulate this here by 12 semitones. Should be fine, okay. And then we use the gate out here from this. We maybe color this yellow so we can see it's a gate. Okay. Maybe paint this in here. So maybe make a test here and use a different instrument track and get in the notes from the note grid. Record this here. And look at how it looks like. You can see here we have some problems already. So here we introduce kind of notes, the right notes. But we also introduce here some micro tunings. As you can see, it's off by 0.26. Here it's by -7. So we have some bends in there, some micro tunings, which we don't want. We want to have straight notes. And I haven't figured out why this is. But I think the problem lies here in the transpose module. I kind of can use here an quantize, something like this, which doesn't help. So I want to use here the quantize, right, to quantize all nodes to a current pitch. This doesn't work. Yeah, kind of. Okay, I guess it works. But in my tests, it hasn't worked. I still got some bends in there, some pitch bends. But yeah, it kind of works now. Okay, so with this transpose here, you can also replace this here with the bias. I had more luck with using a bias and switching this to bipolar mode and modulating this instead of using a transpose for some reason. For some reason now it works, but maybe later on it doesn't. So keep this in mind. So maybe modulate this here again. Also remove this, 12. Something like this. So now we have this here in a perfect, nice chromatic scale. And if you want to have a scale, you probably want to use a key filter here. It's better than implementing this in the grid itself, because you want to stay modular. Sometimes people just want to have chromatic scales. Sometimes they want to dial in certain scales. You can also replace this here with a transpose map, for instance, and use more exotic scales or something. But here we can just find the key filter. I make a test again here. Maybe record this. Yeah, it's still off, as you can see here, 0 minus 0.5. That's not what we want. We want to have straight pitches. In my opinion, we can see we already use here a sample node and we use a pitch quantize. So this transpose doesn't care. You still transpose within a gate on for some reason. So I'm replacing this here for a bias. I also tried different tricks here. Trust me, I tried different tricks just to keep a steady pitch. I also use some multipliers for getting the pitch through, but these bends are so persistent, I don't know why. So maybe modulate this. This is a different range. So record this again here. Now we have straight pitches. As you can see here, the line, micro expression line, is perfectly in the middle. There are no offsets. It's much better. So my tip, use the bias. It's basically the same. It has just a different range. Okay, so now that we have this, let's see if we can arrange this here a bit more. So we have the gates here, we have the pitch, sample, and hold. Maybe we could put this here after the sample and hold. Can remove this. And we can maybe also introduce a new step mod for timbre. Duplicate this. And pressure. You can also duplicate this and use it for panning. It's also nice. In the pan, you probably want to have here also bipolar signal. So let's use value here again in bipolar mode for panning. Oh, we have to unfold this. Panning. Modulate all the way. And we want to have here value for pressure and timbre. Bam! Pressure is this, timbre is this. Panning is already modulated. Maybe you can use a name here. Pan. Okay. So now we have a nice little interface here for a step sequencer. Don't need actually some node inputs for anything or node clips here to paint in. We just bring in this sequencer and then we can play some nodes or some gate sequences or hit randomize here and get random sequences. Sometimes it's better here to use a short step range, 3 steps maybe. Maybe bring in here more of the root node. And we can now use your timbre for maybe this setting. pressure here to mix in the second oscillator. So we can also paint this in. And we can change the panning. And it's persistent, so when you save this with your project, it still stays the same. Maybe the panning is too much here. And yeah, you can use the mount knob here to actually scale the whole modulation. Nice. So now off to the next idea. Maybe you don't want to trigger actually a polysynth. You want to trigger a drum sequencer, for instance. Maybe remove this here. Maybe you have the XO. The XO has a different mapping. Maybe I choose here some random kit. Something like this. And you want to trigger here these notes, right? But here you start at C1, C1, C sharp 1, D1, and so on. So 7, basically 7 semitones up. So we can implement this here and use a button and call this button drums, maybe. So for drum mapping. And we pull this out, we use here an merge. Or maybe a select is enough. And just dial in here maybe a second note. I mean, you could just use transpose or something like this, would also work. I'm going here for so C1. So I'm connecting this here with the button, calling this button drums. And when you press the button, then you get C1. If you release the button, you get C3. And then we can modulate these two. We can switch here to the second input. So now we start at C1 as a root node, and everything that you dial in here selects a different different drum kit. So we can try this. Select pitches here. So you have to stay basically here in the range of these 7 semitones. Here we are probably 24 semitones or something like this. So we probably have to change here also the range of this. Maybe we use here a merge to select between different modulation amounts. So this is here the range of melodies. And this is the range of +7 maybe. So we can also switch this here to bipolar mode off and just modulate into the positive range, but not that much, maybe just 7. I don't know how many. It's not transpose, right? So maybe switch this here to transpose instead. Let's see, that shouldn't be a problem for pitch glides here. Now we just modulate by 7 semitones. 7. And we use a value here. And we use this to interpolation to nearest, so we switch between these two. And we call this range map or something. We use a macro here to switch between the mappings. Map 12, 7, something like this. So when we turn this up, it's perfectly nice for XO. If you turn this down, then it's perfect for melodies or drum sequences that have more than 7 semitone steps. So when we turn this up here to 7 and have drums enabled, then we probably play in the sequencer here with this value, the top step here. Let's see. No, not really. Maybe you need to modulate. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, we need to modulate by 12. We need more than 12. Yeah. So now we can randomize. And this should be the kick drum here. Yeah, it's the kick drum. So modulating nothing is the kick drum. Different loop length here. Maybe a bit faster. It's already a nice groove. So yeah, then you have here the right mapping for the XO, or you can switch this here to a different range, then you probably exceed here the number, right? So sometimes you have, instead of XO, you have maybe something like addictive drums. And there you have multiple octaves of mappings for drum kits here. So these 7 steps are not enough. But also here the 0 value is basically the kick drum. But here the interesting thing is, when you choose a different length for the gates and velocity settings and the pitches, you can, when you have your an even number for steps, like 16 steps here, you can dial in at the same position the snare drum for the pitch, right? So you dial in here the pitch for the snare drum at the same position, but the gates actually doesn't trigger the snare every time it passes through here because you have odd numbers. And it leads to all kinds of interesting rhythms sometimes, which is really nice to play around with. Kind of like this groove. So now we can put this here to a second track, push the drums off, and we can use maybe a polysynth again. And try to find the key. Find some melodies here, pitch. It's a really nice odd groove you can create with this. So maybe we can also add some more whistles and bells to this. So why not introduce some rolls or some glitch stuff in there? So maybe we can take here the gate signal of our drum, drum note grid, and maybe use here select, gate select, and in here create repeats, note repeats, and then we switch basically to a gate repeater here. Let me see. Value. Oh, let's use a button. So this is the hi-hat, obviously. And maybe we switch also off here playback, select. So every time we hit the stop on the transport, we don't want to have a gate signal playing. Only when we hit play. So we create here another step sequencer, step mod, and call this maybe rolls or something like this. And we do the same thing. We use a value, and replace this with the button, and go to 49.9. Call this rolls. And then we can modulate this here all the way up. And then the value actually changes here, the gate repeats. Maybe we start at a smaller value here. Let's see. Yeah. And here again, if you use odd numbers, you don't repeat on each 2 bars at the same position, the same rolls. So when you have this here at different odd lengths, then kind of create a polyrhythmic pattern or sequence, and you have rolls at different points in your sequence, which is much more interesting in my opinion. Also, you have to see when you have your short loop length and this one is longer, then this playhead switches back to the initial position, so you have to make this here a bit longer, so actually fit all the sequences in. So right, if you have this here at 1, you can see it switches back to 1 before it's ending here. Because we have synchronized this here to transport, which is nice. Oh, we can also use here with groove, of course, later on. Nice. Yeah, make this a bit longer. And make this slower. Maybe this also too much. If you don't like to have these rolls so in pretty off timings, you can also sneak in here in between a clock quantizer and quantize these steps here to maybe, let's say 32 beats. Get a more of a synchronized flair. Or 64. Nice. Now we have to make this a bit tidy. So yeah, cool stuff. Maybe a peak limiter here. Maybe also create your baseline. Let's see if this works. No transpose, we want to have this a bit lower here. So you can see, because of the modularity of Bitwig Studio, we don't need to implement every feature. We just can use here Node FX to tweak the signal to our likings. Maybe jump. Oh, there's some rolls in there. Okay, don't need that. Maybe the pitch sequence should be more simple. Maybe you can use your pressure timer. Oh yeah, we also need to remove here the panning. Bring it a bit more right here. Slower. Too slow. If you don't like the velocity steps in there, you can also dial this down here. Yeah, we need, of course, also here the key filter. Maybe different kit. yeah, if you want to record all this stuff, then you can, as always, use an instrument track. Select as an input here, below tracks. You can even select here the note grid. Maybe you can also rename this here to step sequencer. Yeah. Input step step sequencer. There it is. Just hit record. Then you get the pattern here. Now look at all these pitch glides here. This is actually the glitches coming from the transpose. And it's much better to use, like I said in the beginning here, to use the bias. For some reason, all these pitch bends make it through all these sample and holds and pitch quantizers. I don't know why. It's probably because how the node system inside Bitwig Studio works. But yeah, there it is. You can record it. Easy peasy. That's it for this tutorial. You can also download this patch, of course, on my Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Leave a like if you like the video, dislike if you don't like the video, and leave me a comment if you have some questions. Thanks for subscribing, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.